So today, my talk title is You Can Do That, and we're going to talk about power. We're going to talk about your power. We're going to talk about limitations, and then we're also going to talk about being in the flow, because that's where our power comes from. I want to explore for a bit how we step into our power, what that looks like, and it may look a bit different than you think it does, or a bit different than you've been told. So as we study the wisdom, because that's what we do here, we study the sages, ancient teachers, newer teachers, we find that many caution us against stepping into the same trap, making the same misstep. That trap involves confusing illusion with reality, right? Confusing falsehood with truth. Even if they appear true to us, we tend to step into this misunderstanding. We all do it. We do it individually. We do it as a group. We do it collectively. We do it nationally. We sometimes do it globally. Why does this matter? Because when we hold on to illusion, when we hold on to the falsehoods believing they are true, it leads us to pain. Doesn't it? When we hold on to the truth, seeing it clearly, it leads us to peace and freedom and joy, no matter what the circumstances of our lives. We need to be able to tell the difference. This is the goal of our spiritual practices. Everything I read, when I study or I read about confusing illusion with truth, about being able to see clearly, about stilling the waters so that we see past appearances, it all has to do with spiritual practices. And I know that I get up here and I sound like an absolute broken record. If anyone needs to know what a record is, see anybody? I mean, it's true, but it does. We stick to our daily practices and it makes such a difference. That is why I sound like such a whiner about spiritual practices, because it makes a huge difference. We need to be able to tell the difference. It sounds like it's easy, but it's really not. So last week at Community Circles, we were talking about A Course in Miracles, which I love. I am no way a student of the Course in Miracles. I am a Course in Miracles dabbler. Are there any other Course in Miracles dabblers? Okay, yeah. How many people have started A Course in Miracles like 400 times? Okay, one day we need to actually do it. It starts with this phrase, which I love. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. Do you feel the energy shift when I say that? Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. Oh my God! Talk over. Let's go get some coffee. That's it. For those unfamiliar with the Course, it's what Marianne Williamson calls an invitation to peace. It's a series of mind exercises, channeling. I'm not going to go into the background of the Course, but if you want to find out a little bit more about it, you can see me afterwards. It's just fascinating. Revelations and truths designed to teach us that we give meaning to all we see. We give meaning to everything around us that we perceive, that happens to us, and that our highest wisdom and joy lies in rejecting the illusion of fear in favor of the truth of love and separation. Love and forgiveness. The definition of a miracle, according to the Course in Miracles, is it's not, the parting of the Red Sea, or, columns of fire, or, bushes that burn but are not consumed. It's the transition, it's the shift from fear to love. It's the mental shift from a paradigm of fear to the understanding of forgiveness and love. That is a miracle. Now, this is ancient wisdom. A Course in Miracles was not the first treatise to say this. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna teaches Arjuna the exact same enduring truth when he says, "That which is not shall never be. That which is shall never cease to be." I love the Bhagavad Gita. But that's the exact same thing. What Krishna is saying is the truth endures, the false never existed. Isn't that comforting? I mean, think about that. Just think about that for a second. The truth endures, the false never existed. And yet we spend so much time worrying about it, planning for it, fearing it. What do I mean by the false? Okay, well, let's start with the stories that we make up about ourselves, right? Let's start with the assumptions we make up about ourselves. There's so many. That we are separate, that we are not enough. Last week as I was driving here, I was following an SUV that had written on the back, "You are worthy." Guess who that was? It was Brian. He pulled in right here. I said, I don't know where you're driving, honey, but I'm going to keep following you. You are worthy. And that's one of the illusions that we just ladle on top of ourselves, that we are not worthy, that we are not deserving of any good breaks, of any good fortune. For some reasons which, if we asked our friends or family, they would not even be able to articulate why we're not deserving any of that. But we think that we are not. Our illusions include assumptions about ourselves and our world that we are taught, often so young, we are not even aware that we are internalizing a burden we are going to carry for decades, right? We just carry it like that big, heavy sack of rocks on our back. Every day we pick it up and we just go through the day, then at night we lay it down and go to sleep, pick it up the next day. What are some other assumptions? People are always out to get you. Life is not fair. Life is a struggle, right? How many of us were taught those things? How many of us get up every day thinking those things? Eric Butterworth draws a useful distinction here. In his book, In the Flow of Life, he writes that we all live as though we are living from the outside in. Now, what does that mean? He kind of likens it to each of us going around with our little begging bowl, kind of taking whatever life gives us. Our happiness and our security are determined by what happens to us, by the events around us, by what people say about us, by stuff that happens to us. We are the recipients of life's events. That's living life from the outside in. However, the truth is, no matter what happens to us, that we actually live life from the inside out, or as Butterworth calls it, from within out. So what does that mean? It means that everything that happens to us, and think about this because this is an important point, everything that happens to us, we assign meaning to it. There's no meaning that life gives it other than what we give it. Don't you find that to be true? Everything that happens to us means to us what we make it mean. Good, bad, neutral, it doesn't matter. The problem is that we assign meaning to things without examining our assumptions. Does anybody find that to be true? We assign meaning just automatically. We just kick in a meaning. If you're like me, it's usually a bad meaning. I did that wrong again. I can't do that. I got to tell you a quick side story. My title being, you can do that. Every day, I love the Stoics. You know me, I talk about Stoicism all the time. I have this book on my Kindle. It's called 366 Days of Stoic Wisdom. So I open it up to June 10th this morning at 4 o'clock. We're not talking about that. Okay. Guess what the title was? You can do it. Oh my God. Okay, whoever doesn't believe in God, I just talked you into it. That was it. You can do it. It was like, oh my God. Because sometimes when you're getting ready for a talk, you're just like, what is important? What can I say? Why am I going to ask these people to waste 20 minutes of their life talking, listening to me yammer? But you can do it. I'm like, yes, I can actually practice what it is that I talk about. Right? That was an aside. Okay, so the problem that we give life's events are usually the result of our perceptions and our assumptions that are unexamined. Who is it said the unexamined life is not worth living? That is so true. Let me give you an example. This is an old story. It was told by the Chinese sage Lao Tzu. The story is called The Axe Thief. Has anybody heard the story of the Axe Thief? It's a great story. It's been told millions of times. Once upon a time, a farmer had a well-made axe that he absolutely prized. One day, he could not find his axe. It was gone. He flew into a panic. He suspected his neighbor's son, and he began to observe him, believing this young man had stolen his axe. And as he looked at the young man, he saw that he walked funny, and he looked like he was hiding something. He was kind of shifty, and he was looking over his shoulder like there was something going on. Then he struck up a conversation with the young man. And the young man's eyes were shifty, and he just acted guilty. The farmer knew this young man had stolen his axe just from the way the kid was acting. So the farmer said, I must bring this young man to justice. And so he set off to tell the young man's son the young man's father, what this boy had done. On the way, he's walking through the woods. he sees a glint off to the right. I think everyone can finish the story. He sees his axe leaning against a tree, and he realizes that he was here yesterday chopping wood, and he laid it down and forgot it. The young man had not stolen it. He had just simply mislaid it. He turned around, he picked his axe up, he goes back, and he runs into the young man again. And all of a sudden, things are different. The young man does not look guilty. His eyes are not shifty. He's not bearing himself in a way that suggests he did something wrong. And the farmer's like, what happened? This is completely different. What happened to this young man? Well, I think we can all finish this story. What happened is his perception changed. He found the axe, right? He found the truth of the situation, and all of a sudden this young man did not look as guilty as he otherwise had, because his guilty demeanor had been entirely in the perception of the farmer because he believed something that was not true. The translation of that story that I was using for purposes of this talk came from a guy named Derek Lynn. And he goes on to teach, how do we get past these assumptions? He says, we each must find the axe. We each must find our own axe, which means that we must find the truth. We must get past the assumptions and find out the truth of that particular event or that particular scenario. So, has that ever happened to you? I'm sure it happens to me all the time. Okay, so when does it happen to me? People don't call, right? People don't call back fast enough. People don't text me back fast enough. Something happens and my story machine just winds up, right? I'm not going to ask for a show of hands. But I am guessing that this happens to most people, because that's what I do when there's a gap and I don't know. I just fill it in. My assumptions just go nuts. Our assumptions are fed by our perceptions. Course in Miracles teaches that your mind is the means by which you determine your own condition, because mind is the mechanism of decision. You must learn to change your mind about your mind. Your mind is the mechanism of decision. We need to be more aware how we are thinking. The Course in Miracles teaches us, not very kind about this, but it's totally accurate, is that our minds are completely undisciplined. I mean, we just fly all over the place, and we are making stuff up. Part of the discipline of the Course, and it is a discipline, is to train our minds, to be aware of what we are thinking, to be able to see more clearly, because, again, the meaning that we give everything is a meaning that only we can give it. So we need to be very sure that we are right in the meaning we are giving it. The Course in Miracles then says, I love this thought, the world is nothing in itself. Your mind must give it meaning. What a mind-bending thought. Think about that. As you go through your day, just today, think about the meaning that you are giving the various events, the various conversations, the various circumstances. It's all you. Just use that as an exercise today. Think about the meaning that you are giving what is happening to you today, or what people look at you like, or what people speak to you like. Think about the farmer and the axe thief. The fact that his axe was missing had no meaning other than the meaning he gave it, right? It was a wrong meaning until he found the axe. So that is our challenge. This day and this week, we just have to find the axe. We just have to find the truth about what it is that we are thinking. Peace comes when we are able to discipline our minds to see clearly, to see truly, to see what meaning we are giving the circumstances in which we find ourselves. Author Ezra Beta writes, the transformation of fear does not mean that we no longer have fearful responses. It means that we no longer believe that those responses are who we are, right? We get to be the observers. We get to govern what we think, what we believe, what we assume. We need to unpack all those stories about our unworthiness, our lack of deserving, our limitations, all the stuff that tells us that we can't do it. One of the things that we did a few years ago here at One World was take a class by Coach Maria Nemeth. She works with the Academy of Coaching Excellence. And she teaches, this is such a Cliff Notes version, that each of us by the time we're 3 or 4 has what she calls a basic assumption. And it's been told to us, our basic assumption is a filter through which we see the world. It's a lens through which we see the world. I am not enough, I don't know, I can't do it. My basic assumption is, I don't know. Closely followed by, I can't do it. So what does that mean? That means, Yeah, really, we write these talks for ourselves. So what does that mean? That means that I have to be aware that everything I see in the world, I may be perceiving through the filter of I don't know. Maybe that's why every book I read the end first. I don't know, because I don't like not to know, you know? If you ever see a movie, I'm going to say what happens at the end. You know, but I know that's just the filter that I have. It helps us to realize the filters through which we see our lives. Brian last week did this great imitation of running into a coffee table and stubbing his toe, and he was talking about limitations. He was talking about how we just kind of wander through life not realizing what gets in our way. When I saw that, he was doing this great imitation, which I won't do, but ow, 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 and he kept stubbing his toe until finally he realized, why don't I just move the stupid coffee table? Often, the thing we stumble against is something we put there ourselves. It's not a coffee table put there by us, it's something we set up ourselves, and we need to be aware of it. The power to be aware of it, the power to stop stubbing our spiritual toes is entirely ours. Okay. So once we do that, once we unpack the illusion, once we start on that journey, because it is a journey, awakening to see clearly is not a destination, it is a journey. And we're not going to finish it this time around, we're just keep working at it. What is left? When we decide we're going to put aside the illusion, put aside the fear, what is left? What is the truth of us? It is said that we are, Henri Nouwen said this and others have said it, that we are not humans having a spiritual experience, we are spiritual beings having a human experience. And what that means is that we are each the consciousness of the universal consciousness. We are each of the divine energy. The Rig Veda teaches truth is one. Different people call it by different names. So whether you call this universal energy God, Allah, Brahma, Buddha, it doesn't matter. I sometimes call it God, I sometimes call it spirit, I call it the divine creative energy, universal mind, it doesn't matter. We are each manifestations of that. We are each embodiments of that. One of my favorite teachers, Rabbi Rami Shapiro, teaches that this divine energy is not static. So we can say, I am Melanie manifesting as God. You know, I am Melanie expressing as God on earth. The way he puts it, which I love, is that I am God Melanieing. You are God gaying, right? You are God Pauling, whatever. It is perfect. It is because God is dynamic. Pastor Richard Rohr says that God is a circle dance, right? Always moving, always relating. God is in the relationships. God is in the energy. God is in the movement. So if we think about it that way, and we recognize that this energy cannot be static, what is left? We are part of it. We are created by it. And what is it waiting for? It is waiting for us to inject our energy into the mix. That is what co-creation is. It is us putting our energy into that global consciousness and making the difference that only we can make. In his book, The 7 Spiritual Laws of Success, Deepak Chopra writes that we are pure consciousness. He writes we are pure potentiality. Think about that. Did you get up this morning feeling like pure potentiality? You are. I see people laughing. No, the question, it's true. And part of what we have to do, maybe all of what we have to do, is realize that is who we are. That is the truth of who we are. Now, we are in these physical suits. We are limited by the gross matter that we are. I mean, I can't, you know, fly to the moon and do all these various other things just by myself. So in that sense, we have to be pure potentiality consistent with who we are as humans, right? This is one thing that interests me about being in the flow. And I'm going to talk about that in a way that I hope makes sense. Because it's very easy for me to stand up here and talk about In the Flow, Eric Butterworth, In the Flow of Life. It's a wonderful book. I recommend it. But when I say you are in the flow, you find your power when you live in the flow, what does that mean? I mean, how do I urge you to get up out of this room and go out and be in the flow? It's one of those phrases that sounds great, but then you start trying to put it into practice and you're like, what the heck was that? And we know the Stoics, if it's not wisdom that you can use in your life, don't waste your time, right? If it's not something that you can actually get up and use, don't waste your time with it. That's what we try to do here. So what does it mean to be in the flow? For one, it means that we do nothing alone, right? It means that we are co-creating with the power that made us. Not only the power that made us, the power that is us. We can stop fighting, we can stop struggling, we can stop believing the world is against us, because it's not. The world is conspiring for us. Eric Butterworth teaches that when we start thinking consistently with the natural flow of energy, abundance comes to us. And I'm not talking about money. I mean, when people start talking about abundance, everyone thinks they're going to start getting $100 bills on their head. That would be great. But that's not what it is. When I'm talking about abundance, I mean, you know, there are some folks who teach New Thought. It's kind of like if you hold your mouth right, you're going to go out and there's going to be a jaguar. That's not the way it is. Because there's so many more facets to abundance that are wonderful, that we need as much as we need money. Joy, relationship, work, health, wonder, just having the ability to be grateful for everything that happens means that we live in abundance, right? Because you can't be fearful and grateful at the same time. When we live in the flow of the universe, we experience abundance. We may experience material abundance, we may not, I don't know. But we do feel that our life is abundant. Emerson wrote of this truth when he said, our life might be much easier and simpler than we make it. God, wouldn't that be great? The world might be a happier place than it is. There's no need of struggles, convulsions, and despairs, of the wringing of hands and the gnashing of teeth. We miscreate our own evils. We interfere with nature. So Butterworth gives an example of this story, of this principle. And what he does is he tells the story of a man who had lost his job. This is in the flow of life. He tells this man had lost his job. He was sitting at his desk. He had just been fired, and he's just disconsolate. He is so upset. He does not know what's going to happen next. There's a spider on his desk, and he just brushes this spider off. And as he watches, the spider starts heading toward the ground, and then a little string goes out, a web goes out, and the spider catches itself, and it lets itself down gently to the ground, and it just walks off. And the man says, wait a minute, if this spider that was about to die, to whom I just did great violence, can have that event and turn it into something wonderful just by being itself, maybe I can do the same. And he realized that he had been struggling, that he had been working too hard, and that when he just surrendered and felt free to do what it was he wanted to do what it was that the universe was leading him to, he would find peace and joy and perhaps success. So he started writing. He had always wanted to write. So he started writing. And he didn't turn into Ernest Hemingway, but he sold a bunch of stuff. He could support himself. He took that example of a little spider just behaving as its nature taught it and surviving a calamitous experience, and he turned it into a lesson for him that he could do the same in his own life. He could lead himself to where he was happier. Butterworth says, there is a longing in the heart of the universe to flow forth into and to perfect all that has been created. This is the basis of all healing and success and overcoming. He wrote, if you can just get into the flow of the universe within you, you will experience an immediacy of the presence of God. This is not, now Butterworth was a Christian. He wrote from a Christian terminology, but this is not a new thought. Lao Tzu wrote that the universe flows as a creative fountain, and our strength comes from flowing with it. So what does this mean on a practical level? What does it mean to be in the flow? I mean, this is all very nice. We go with the flow. We have abundance. We have joy. We have peace. I think one thing that it means is that we trust the process. If you're like me, you do not trust the process, right? Because trusting the process means what? It means surrender. It means believing. It means, even if you can't see over that horizon, believing that it will be your next best step. And that is a scary thing. But that's what co-creation is. Emphasis on the co, right? We have to trust the process. We have to believe that the divine energy that created us, we have to believe it and not just say it. That the divine energy that created us continues to be a force, a real and a positive force for our healing and our growth. The universe, that circle dance, is always just waiting for your input. It is just waiting to respond to what you put into it. So what do? We step out. We take action, even if we are not sure where it's going to lead us. You know, it's so funny because when we say, you can do that, I spent the week focused on certain things. You can do that. So, okay, we were going to talk about can. And as the week got further on, I started focusing on that. You can do that. How do we pick a that? Right? Let's say that I decided, I'm a lawyer, as many of you know, that I decided I wanted to be on the Supreme Court because Justice Kennedy is really old, there's going to be a vacancy. Right? Here we go. I have a JD, I can do it. I've been practicing a long time. No! It is not going to happen. So what does that mean? I mean, there are people who say, well, Melanie, if you think about it right, you believe and you visualize and you affirm, you can be on the Supreme Court. That's garbage. It ain't going to happen. So what does that mean? What is the that? Because I don't want to stand up here and teach you that whatever you think you want to do, you can do it, because I don't believe that. Several New Thought guys just went, ah! Okay. What I believe is that if we step forward in belief and joy and faith, that whatever the that is, it will be what we are meant to express. It will be where our gifts take us. So it's not so much I can do that, and I'm going to put a picture of Justice Kennedy up on the wall. I can do what Melanie's gifts are better than anyone else. I can do that. And I'm not going to let fear limit me. I'm not going to let my basic assumption I got when I was 3 limit me. That is what that means. It means that we just step out, knowing that we have gifts to give, and we are not going to wait for the perfect moment. We're not going to wait from an invitation dropped at our feet. We're not going to wait until we're rich and thin, because that ain't going to happen either. Sorry. But at least for me, right? We are just going to start. Myrtle Fillmore said, we must harmonize our thinking and our prayers with actual living experience. We have to get up and start moving, even if we don't know where it will take us. Ram Dass tells a story in his book, How Can I Help?, which I love, I've quoted it before. He tells the story of a woman who called herself a housewife. She said, I was a housewife and a mother looking to do something when the kids got bigger. So she answered an ad in the paper. She didn't have a lot of life skills. She didn't have a resume 12 pages long. She just wanted to do something, didn't know what. So she answered an ad in the paper, putting aside her doubt that she was really not fit to do much. The ad in the paper said, if you love animals, come volunteer at the zoo. How hard is that? Everyone loves animals, so she goes down and she volunteers at the zoo. She became a guide, she started working down at the zoo, and then they created an outreach program. They started taking animals to people who could never come to them. The first place she went was she'd bring them in twos, 2 birds, 2 mammals, 2 reptiles. They brought a snake, they brought a dove. She brought them to nursing homes, hospitals for folks who had incurable diseases, children's wards, burn units. She said in one mental hospital they were taking animals to folks that were called the boys. These were men of all sorts of different ages. And she had a ferret, and one man came running down the hall yelling, touch, touch, touch. And she said, oh, I'll let you touch him later. But when it came time for that man to touch, the guy was no longer interested. It just broke her heart. It taught her, take the opportunity when it's there. She should have let it do it then. In a cancer ward, they showed up with 2 more animals, and a man came out of his room because he had heard that they were animals. He was mad, he had cancer, he was resentful, he was just so broken over his diagnosis, and he was ashamed. He came out and the lady said, "Would you like to touch?" And he said, "Oh sure, with these hands," and he held up his hands and he had no fingers. And so the lady said, "Well, just use your palms." And so he started stroking the animals with his palms, and he just kept doing it, and he started to cry. He said, "This is so beautiful. I will never forget this." Just touching with hands. She said, "It's just something to behold. It's as if you're in the presence of little miracles. To see another person feel the beauty of life, to see their pain transform, to see an anguished face begin to soften. I had never been touched like this before." And she said, "All you're doing is coming in to help with your hands." That was never a career goal of hers. She just answered an ad. All she did was just make sure that she was there, that she was willing, that she put aside whatever she thought she couldn't do to just be there in that moment for those people, and made such a massive difference. That is a good that we can all do. I think that we would not be presented with opportunities which we can do if we were not the right person to do them. I don't think that God plays tricks. I think that when opportunities are presented to us, if we can see past the fear, if we can see past the doubt, I don't think we are presented with things that are not ours to do. It might not look like you think. Life is not a race to a given finish. Life is a series of possibilities that unfold over horizons over which we cannot see. Our job is to take each step in love and integrity and even faith that it is ours to do. And that is the right that. As Butterworth writes, each of us is a flowering of the universal creative process. We are in the flow. That's the flow. Don't pin everything you hope for to a given outcome, because sometimes we don't know. Because sometimes we just don't know. Sometimes we are lunging so fiercely toward given outcomes, we just run right past the wonderful opportunity that is directly in front of us. And we have to be aware of that. Let me close with a phrase from Rumi that I really like. He writes, "Work. Keep digging your well. Don't think about getting off from work. Water is there somewhere." We just keep digging, and the water is there somewhere. Thank you.